Chapter 1. The stop officer Aaron Marshall rolled down Elm Street in his squad car, the hum of the engine a dull soundtrack to his thoughts. The late afternoon sky was fading, casting long golden shadows on the houses and trees that lined the street. To most, it would seem like an ordinary, quiet neighborhood, but Aaron knew better. He had patrolled these streets for years, and he knew that trouble often hid behind the veneer of peace. The silence wasn't comforting, it was a warning. His mind wandered to the events of the day, a series of petty thefts and noise complaints, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, a part of him felt restless. He had joined the force with the idea of making a difference, of serving justice, but after a decade on the job, his perception of what justice meant had changed. He often found himself frustrated with the system, the people he interacted with, and, though he never admitted it aloud, his own sense of disillusionment. His thoughts were interrupted by the crackle of the police radio. All units, be advised, reports of a stolen vehicle heading north on Elm Street. Suspect is a black male, late 20s, driving a red sedan. Plate number CHT 4953. Suspect may be armed. Approach with caution. Aaron's grip tightened on the wheel, his senses immediately on high alert. This is Officer Marshall. I'm in the area. I'll take it, he responded, his voice steady but tinged with anticipation that he didn't need to think twice. Stolen vehicles, robbery suspects, this was the type of call that broke the monotony of routine patrols. As his eyes scanned the road ahead, he spotted the red sedan mentioned in the call. The car was driving just below the speed limit, which, to Aaron, only heightened suspicion. Most people wouldn't notice anything strange, but his instincts told him this was his guy. His heart beat faster with the adrenaline of the chase to come. Aaron flicked on his lights and siren, signaling the driver to pull over. The sedan hesitated for a moment, as though the driver was considering fleeing, before slowly pulling to the side of the road. Aaron pulled in behind, his mind running through the standard procedure. Hand on his holster, he stepped out of the squad car and approached the vehicle cautiously. His eyes locked onto the driver's reflection in the rearview mirror, a young black man, just as the report had described. "Driver, roll down your window." Aaron commanded, his voice echoing with authority. The window slid down slowly, revealing the man's face. He was younger than Aaron had expected, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles turning white, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. "Is there a problem, officer?" the man asked, his voice trembling slightly. His eyes darted from Aaron's face to his gun, then back again. Aaron didn't respond to the question. Instead, he barked his next command, "Step out of the vehicle." The man hesitated, his hand still gripping the steering wheel. "Officer, out of the vehicle." Aaron repeated, his tone hardening as his hand moved instinctively to rest on the grip of his gun. He wasn't taking any chances. Not with a suspect who could be armed. His mind flashed with images of past arrests gone wrong, of colleagues who had hesitated for just a moment too long. The man finally complied, slowly opening the door and stepping out. He kept his hands raised in front of him, palms open in a gesture of surrender. Aaron's eyes never left him, watching for any sudden movements, any sign that the man might resist. But there was none. The man was scared, that much was clear. "Turn around." "Hands on the car," Aaron instructed, reaching for his handcuffs. The man's compliance was immediate, his body language full of resignation. As Aaron cuffed him, he noticed the man's shallow breaths, the slight trembling in his limbs. "Officer, I swear, I didn't steal the car," the man said, his voice thick with desperation. "I borrowed it from a friend. I didn't know it was stolen." Aaron ignored the plea. He had heard it all before, the excuses, the lies. In his experience, suspects would say anything to get out of trouble. As far as he was concerned, the case was open and shut. The car was stolen, the man matched the description, and that was all the evidence he needed. "Tell it to the judge," Aaron muttered as he led the man back to the squad car and pushed him into the back seat. The young man slumped against the seat, his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. As Aaron drove back to the precinct, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest. It was the same feeling he got after every arrest, a nagging sense of doubt that gnawed at him. But he always pushed it aside, reminding himself that he was just doing his job. The facts were the facts. The man had been caught in a stolen car. End of story. Yet, this time, that feeling wouldn't go away. It clung to him, even as he parked in front of the station and escorted the man inside. As the suspect was processed and taken to a holding cell, Aaron found himself lingering, watching as the young man sat on the cold metal bench, his head in his hands. There was something about him, something that didn't sit right with Aaron. But he didn't know what it was. Maybe it was the way the man had looked at him, not with anger or defiance, but with a kind of hopelessness that Aaron wasn't used to seeing. That he shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. It didn't matter. He had followed protocol, done everything by the book. The man was guilty. That was all that mattered. But as Aaron left the precinct that night, the image of the man sitting in the holding cell stayed with him, a silent reminder that not everything was as simple as it seemed. Chapter 2, Tyler's perspective. Tyler Johnson sat in the cold, dimly lit cell, his body rigid with tension. His wrists still ached from the tightness of the cuffs, and his heart pounded against his chest as the reality of his situation sank in. He had been arrested. Cuffed like a criminal. And for what? Borrowing a friend's car. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this day made sense. The officer, Marshall, his name was, hadn't even listened to him. From the moment Tyler saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror, he had known something was wrong. He had done everything right, followed every command, kept his hands visible, spoke respectfully. And yet, it hadn't mattered. To Officer Marshall, Tyler was guilty the moment he stepped out of the car. Guilty because of the color of his skin, because he fit some pre-written script in the officer's mind. That it wasn't the first time Tyler had been stopped by the police, but it was the first time it had escalated to this level. Every other encounter had been humiliating in its own way, being questioned for walking through the wrong neighborhood, being pulled over for suspicious behavior while driving home from work, but this was different. This time, they had taken him in, treated him like a thief, a criminal. Tyler leaned back against the cold wall of the cell, his mind racing. Marcus had loaned him the car that morning, said it was fine to use for the day. Tyler had no reason to believe it was stolen. Why would Marcus lend him a stolen car? It didn't add up. He felt a wave of anger rise within him, hot and uncontrollable. He clenched his fists, willing himself to calm down, but the injustice of the situation gnawed at him. He had done nothing wrong, and yet here he was, locked in a cell, his future uncertain. Would they believe him? Would anyone care enough to listen? Tyler had grown up knowing the world wasn't fair. His father had drilled it into him from a young age, how black men had to be twice as careful, twice as cautious, because the world saw them as threats before anything else. He had always hated that lesson, hated the way it made him feel small, powerless. But today, it felt more real than ever. He thought of his mother, of the way she would react when she found out. She had always worried about him, always warned him to stay out of trouble, to keep his head down. He could already hear her voice, full of disappointment and fear. I told you to be careful, Tyler. I told you not to trust anyone. Tyler closed his eyes, trying to block out the thoughts, the fear, the anger. But it was no use. It all came crashing down on him at once, the injustice of it all, the helplessness, the uncertainty of what came next, and all because of a borrowed car. Chapter 3, Seeds of Doubt. Officer Aaron Marshall sat alone at his desk in the precinct, a cup of lukewarm coffee in front of him and the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead doing little to ease the pounding in his head. His mind kept replaying the events of the arrest, every movement, every word exchanged. It was just a routine stop, he reminded himself. The car was stolen, the suspect fit the description, and the arrest was clean. Yet, the uneasy feeling from earlier wouldn't leave him. He stared at the file on his desk, the case file for Tyler Johnson. It was thin, barely more than a few pages, but it felt heavy. He flipped it open, scanning the sparse information they had on the suspect. Tyler's record was clean, save for a couple of minor infractions, parking tickets, nothing serious. There was nothing in there that screamed criminal to Aaron, but there was also nothing to suggest innocence. That was the problem. Everything he knew about Tyler had been colored by the initial report, the description of a young black man driving a stolen car. But what if Tyler had been telling the truth? Aaron pushed the thought away, irritated with himself. He wasn't new to this job. He had seen criminals lie straight to his face countless times, swearing up and down that they were innocent until the evidence piled up against them. But Tyler had seemed different. There was something about the way he looked at Aaron, something vulnerable, something broken that he took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, the creak of the old wood barely audible over the noise of the precinct around him. The other officers were busy with their own cases, typing reports, making calls, processing paperwork. To them, Tyler Johnson was just another arrest, just another piece of paperwork to be filed away. But to Aaron, it felt personal now. And he didn't know why. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Marshall, you good?" Aaron looked up to see his partner, Officer Dave Sanders, leaning against the doorframe of his office, a concerned expression on his face. Dave had been with the department almost as long as Aaron, though their approaches to the job couldn't have been more different. Where Aaron was meticulous and reserved, Dave was loud and brash, always ready with a joke or a story. The two had formed a sort of uneasy partnership over the years, though Aaron had always kept a certain distance. "Yeah," Aaron replied, his voice a bit too sharp. "I'm fine." Dave raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "You don't look fine. You've been staring at that file for, like, an hour." Aaron glanced down at the file, surprised at how much time had passed. "Just going over the details." Dave walked in and sat on the edge of Aaron's desk, picking up a paperclip and twisting it absent-mindedly. "You worried about the arrest?" Aaron didn't answer right away. He wasn't the type to second-guess himself, and he definitely wasn't the type to discuss it with someone like Dave. But something about today felt different. His doubts felt heavier. "I don't know," Aaron said finally, his voice low. "Something doesn't feel right about it." Dave shrugged, tossing the mangled paperclip back on the desk. "You're overthinking it, man. The guy was in a stolen car. End of story. It's not like he was some saint. Trust me, you did the right thing." Aaron nodded absently, though Dave's words did little to ease his mind. "Maybe." Dave chuckled, clapping Aaron on the shoulder. "You gotta stop letting this stuff get to you. It's part of the job. Some people are just looking for trouble, and it's our job to catch them before they cause more damage. Don't sweat it." But Aaron wasn't convinced. As Dave got up and left the office, Aaron turned back to the file, his fingers drumming on the desk. It wasn't just about catching troublemakers, it was about justice, about doing the right thing. And for the first time in his career, Aaron wasn't sure if he had done the right thing. Chapter 4, Tyler's world collapses. The air in the holding cell was thick with the stench of sweat and fear. Tyler Johnson sat on the cold metal bench, staring at the faded gray walls, his mind racing. The walls seemed to close in on him with every passing second, each one a reminder of how quickly his life had spiraled out of control. Tyler had spent his entire life trying to avoid this exact situation, being caught up in the system, another statistic in the long line of young black men arrested for crimes they didn't commit. And yet, here he was, sitting in a holding cell, his future hanging by a thread. His thoughts kept circling back to the arrest, to the way Officer Marshall had looked at him. From the moment those lights flashed behind him, Tyler knew what was coming. He had felt the fear settle in his gut, the same fear his father had warned him about when he was just a kid. "Keep your head down," his father had told him. "Don't give them a reason to come after you." But it didn't matter. Tyler had done everything right. He hadn't stolen the car, hadn't resisted, hadn't even raised his voice. But that didn't matter. To Officer Marshall, to the system, he was guilty the moment they saw him. He thought about his mother again, about how disappointed she would be when she found out. She had worked so hard to raise him right, to give him a chance at a better life, and now all of that seemed to be slipping away. What would she say? What would she think when she saw him, handcuffed and arrested like a common criminal? Tyler buried his head in his hands, the weight of it all crushing him. His mind flashed back to the day Marcus had loaned him the car, the casual way his friend had tossed him the keys, never mentioning anything about it being stolen. Marcus wouldn't set him up, would he? No, Marcus was his best friend. He trusted him. But what if Marcus had gotten himself caught up in something and hadn't told Tyler? It didn't matter now. What mattered was that Tyler was the one in jail, and Marcus was nowhere to be found. The door to the holding area creaked open, and a guard entered. "Johnson, you've got a visitor." Tyler's head shot up, confusion and a flicker of hope flashing in his eyes. A visitor? He wasn't expecting anyone. He hadn't even had a chance to call his family. The guard didn't elaborate, just motioned for Tyler to follow him. As Tyler was led down the narrow hallway toward the visitors' area, his mind raced with possibilities. Who could it be? Maybe Marcus had heard about the arrest and had come to explain things. Or maybe, his thoughts were cut short when he saw who was waiting for him. It wasn't Marcus. It was his mother. Tyler's heart sank. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile. Her once strong shoulders seemed to droop under the weight of the situation, and her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. The moment their eyes met, Tyler felt the shame wash over him like a tidal wave. "Mom!" he whispered, his voice breaking. His mother sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Tyler," she said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and disbelief. "What happened?" He shook his head, his throat tightening with emotion. "It's not what you think, Mom. I didn't do anything. I swear, I didn't steal the car." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "I know you didn't," she said finally, her voice steady. "But that doesn't matter now, does it? You're here. You're in jail. And that's all they'll see." Her words cut deep because they were true. It didn't matter that he was innocent. The moment he had been arrested, he became just another black man behind bars, another statistic. And no matter how hard he tried to fight it, the system was stacked against him. "I'm going to get you out of here," his mother said firmly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. "We're going to get a lawyer, and we're going to fight this. You're not staying in here, Tyler. I won't let them do this to you." Tyler nodded, though a part of him didn't believe her. He had seen it happen too many times before, people getting caught up in the system, being chewed up and spit out by a justice system that didn't care about their innocence. It was hard to have hope when everything around him felt so hopeless. "I didn't do anything wrong," Tyler said again, more to himself than to his mother. "I know," she repeated softly, reaching across the table to take his hand. "But we'll get through this. We have to." As Tyler sat there, holding his mother's hand, he felt a strange mix of hope and despair. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that things would work out, that the truth would come to light. But in the back of his mind, a dark cloud of doubt hung heavy. Chapter 5, The Confrontation. The precinct was buzzing with activity when Officer Aaron Marshall walked in the next morning. He hadn't slept well, his mind kept circling back to Tyler's face, to the way the young man had looked at him with those accusing eyes. It had been a long time since Aaron had questioned an arrest this much, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He walked past the rows of desks, barely acknowledging the greetings from his fellow officers, his mind elsewhere. When he reached his own desk, he was surprised to see someone waiting for him. Tyler's mother. She was sitting in one of the chairs in front of his desk, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as Aaron approached, her eyes hard and unwavering. "Officer Marshall," she said, her voice calm but filled with a quiet intensity. Aaron hesitated for a moment before sitting down behind his desk. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice guarded. He had a feeling he knew why she was here, and he wasn't looking forward to the conversation. "I need to talk to you about my son," she said, cutting straight to the point. "He didn't steal that car. I know you think he did, but you're wrong." Aaron leaned back in his chair, folding his arms over his chest. "Mrs. Johnson, your son was found in possession of a stolen vehicle. We followed protocol," she interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "You think this is about protocol? My son is sitting in a jail cell for a crime he didn't commit because you assumed he was guilty the moment you saw him." Aaron stiffened, the accusation hitting a little too close to home. He opened his mouth to respond, to defend himself, but she wasn't finished. "I raised my son to be a good man," she continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's not a criminal. He's not some thug. He didn't deserve to be treated like one." Aaron felt a pang of guilt, but he tried to push it aside. "Mrs. Johnson, I understand that you're upset," she repeated, her voice incredulous. "You have no idea what it's like to be a mother, watching your son get taken away in handcuffs for something he didn't do. You have no idea what it's like to live in a world where people see the color of his skin before they see him." Aaron swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. He had heard similar accusations before, claims of racial profiling, of unfair treatment, but he had always brushed them off. He didn't see color when he made arrests, he saw facts. Or at least, that's what he had always told himself. But now, looking into Mrs. Johnson's eyes, he wasn't so sure anymore. Chapter 6. A crumbling wall. Officer Aaron Marshall remained seated, his mouth slightly open, at a loss for words as Mrs. Johnson's piercing gaze bore into him. He felt exposed, as if every doubt that had been gnawing at him since the arrest was now laid bare. His job had always been straightforward: get the facts, make the arrest, follow protocol. It had been simple, black and white. But now, in this moment, the lines between right and wrong, justice and prejudice, were blurring in front of his eyes. Mrs. Johnson continued, her voice quieter now, but no less powerful. All I'm asking, Officer Marshall, is for you to look at my son, not as another suspect, not as a case number, but as a person. He didn't steal that car. He doesn't deserve to have his life ruined over a mistake. Aaron shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his mind racing. He wanted to defend himself, to insist that he had followed the law, that he had done what was expected of him. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the whole truth. He had made assumptions the moment he saw Tyler, assumptions that had nothing to do with the facts of the case and everything to do with his own ingrained biases. I'll look into it, Aaron said finally, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. Mrs. Johnson didn't smile, didn't offer him any thanks. She simply nodded, her face still etched with the worry and determination that had brought her to the precinct in the first place. You'd better, she said softly, standing up from the chair. Because I won't stop until my son's name is cleared. Aaron watched as she walked out of his office, her back straight, her head held high. He felt a strange sense of admiration for her, this woman who had come to fight for her son with such strength and resilience. And yet, that admiration was tempered by a deep, unsettling guilt. Once she was gone, Aaron sat in silence for a long time, staring at the case file on his desk. It was thin, too thin. There were too many unanswered questions, too many gaps that he had glossed over in his haste to make the arrest. He had relied on the description given by dispatch, on the fact that the car had been reported stolen, and on the assumption that Tyler Johnson was guilty because he fit the profile of a suspect. But what if Mrs. Johnson was right? What if Tyler really hadn't known the car was stolen? What if Marcus, the so-called friend, had set him up, or worse, had gotten him tangled in a mess that neither of them fully understood? Aaron's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was his superior, Sergeant Paulson, a gruff man with years of experience under his belt and little patience for second-guessing. Marshall, Paulson said, stepping into the office. Heard you had a little visit from the Johnson woman. Everything all right? Aaron nodded, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Yeah, she's upset about her son. She thinks he's innocent. Paulson snorted, folding his arms across his chest. They all think their kid's innocent, Marshall. It's part of the job. You can't let every sob story get to you. Aaron looked down at the file on his desk, the words blurring in front of him. I know, but something about this case doesn't sit right with me. I can't shake the feeling that I might have jumped the gun. Paulson's expression softened, though only slightly. Look, you made the arrest based on the facts at the time. You followed protocol. You've been on the force long enough to know that we don't always get every detail right, but that's what the courts are for. You did your job. Now, it's up to the system to do the rest. Aaron wanted to agree, wanted to believe that he had done everything by the book and that his doubts were unfounded. But Mrs. Johnson's words kept replaying in his mind, the weight of her accusation pressing down on him like a vice. Yeah, Aaron said quietly, though he didn't sound convinced. I guess you're right. Paulson gave him a firm pat on the shoulder. Don't overthink it, Marshall. You're a good cop. Just keep doing your job, and everything will work out. But as Paulson left the office, Aaron knew that it wasn't that simple. He had followed protocol, but had he really done his job? Wasn't his job to serve justice, to find the truth? And what if, in his rush to make the arrest, he had missed something important, something that could exonerate Tyler? Aaron looked at the clock on the wall. He had a few hours before his next shift. Enough time to start digging into the details he had overlooked. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number for the auto shop where Marcus Williams worked. Chapter 7, Digging Deeper. The sun was setting as Aaron pulled into the parking lot of Williams' auto shop. The place was run down, a far cry from the pristine, high-end garages on the other side of town. The sign above the shop was faded, the paint peeling, and a few cars sat in the lot, most of them in various states of disrepair. It wasn't exactly the kind of place that inspired confidence. Aaron stepped out of his car, the cool evening air prickling his skin. He wasn't here on official business, at least, not yet. This was more of a personal inquiry, a way to settle his own doubts. He approached the shop, his eyes scanning the scene for Marcus Williams, Tyler's friend and the man who had supposedly lent him the stolen car. Inside the shop, the air was thick with the smell of oil and gasoline. A few mechanics were working on cars, their hands dirty and their clothes stained with grease. Aaron spotted Marcus near the back of the shop, talking to a customer. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a confident demeanor, his hair shaved close to his scalp. He didn't look like a criminal, but Aaron knew better than to judge a book by its cover. Marcus glanced up as Aaron approached, his expression cautious but not unfriendly. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm Officer Marshall," Aaron said, pulling out his badge. "I'm investigating the case involving Tyler Johnson and the stolen car. I wanted to ask you a few questions." Marcus's face tightened slightly, though he tried to hide it. "Look, I already told the other officer everything I know. I didn't know the car was stolen. I borrowed it from a buddy, and I let Tyler use it. That's it." Aaron nodded, though he wasn't satisfied with the answer. "I understand, but I need more details. Who did you borrow the car from?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to the side as if weighing his options. "Reggie Thompson," he said finally. "He works at another shop down on 5th Street. He let me borrow the car a few days ago. I didn't ask too many questions. I needed a ride, and he said he had an extra car I could use." Aaron scribbled down the name. "And you didn't know the car was stolen?" Marcus shook his head, his jaw tightening. "No, man. Why would I let my best friend drive a stolen car? I didn't know." Aaron studied Marcus for a moment, trying to gauge whether he was telling the truth. It was possible that Marcus had been duped by Reggie, just as Tyler had been duped by Marcus. But something about the way Marcus was holding himself, the way he avoided Aaron's eyes, made Aaron suspicious. "Do you mind if I talk to Reggie?" Aaron asked, his voice calm but firm. Marcus stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "You don't think I'm involved in this, do you?" Aaron raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this. If Reggie's responsible, then we need to know. But if you're involved in something, whether you meant to be or not, it's better for you to come clean now." Marcus glared at him for a long moment before sighing and looking away. "I didn't steal the car, okay? And neither did Tyler. Reggie gave me the car. If anyone's guilty, it's him." Aaron nodded, his suspicion deepening. He didn't like the way Marcus was distancing himself from the situation, putting all the blame on Reggie. It felt too convenient, too rehearsed. But there was no concrete evidence against Marcus, at least, not yet. "All right," Aaron said finally. "I'll talk to Reggie. But if there's more to this story, Marcus, now's the time to come clean." Marcus didn't respond, his jaw clenched tightly as he turned back to the car he had been working on. Aaron watched him for a moment before turning and leaving the shop, his mind already racing ahead to the next step. As he drove to the address Marcus had given him, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Marcus had seemed too eager to pin everything on Reggie, too quick to distance himself from the situation. And Tyler. Tyler had been completely unaware of the stolen car, completely blindsided by the arrest, but what if Marcus wasn't the only one hiding something? Chapter 8, Truth Unveiled. The auto shop on 5th Street was even more rundown than Marcus's. Aaron parked his car out front, the neon "open" sign flickering erratically in the window. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for whatever he might find. If Reggie was the one behind the stolen car, Aaron would need to handle this carefully. But if Marcus had lied, if Tyler's innocence was being used to cover for someone else, then the entire case was about to blow wide open. He stepped inside the shop, the smell of motor oil and burnt rubber filling the air. A few cars were scattered around the garage, but there was no sign of anyone working. Aaron approached the counter, tapping the bell to get someone's attention. After a few moments, a man emerged from the back of the shop. He was shorter than Marcus, with a stocky build and a thick beard. His eyes were sharp, and his movements deliberate as he sized Aaron up. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice gruff. "I'm Officer Marshall," Aaron said, flashing his badge. "I'm investigating a case involving a stolen car. I need to ask you a few questions about a vehicle you loaned to Marcus Williams." Reggie's expression didn't change, though his eyes flicked to the side for a split second, just long enough for Aaron to notice. "I don't know what you're talking about," Reggie said, his voice steady. Aaron wasn't buying it. "Marcus said you gave him the car. That car was reported stolen. If you didn't know, now's the time to come clean." Reggie folded his arms across his chest, his face a mask of indifference. "I didn't give Marcus anything. If he told you that, he's lying." Aaron's eyes narrowed. He had expected Reggie to deny any involvement, but the way he was doing it, so flat, so emotionless, set off alarm bells in Aaron's head. "Look," Aaron said, his voice firm but calm. "I don't care who stole the car. I care about getting to the truth. Marcus is pointing the finger at you. If you want to tell your side of the story, now's your chance." For a moment, Aaron thought Reggie might crack. His eyes darted toward the back of the shop, his jaw tightening. But then, just as quickly, his face went blank again. "I don't know anything about a stolen car." Aaron stared at him for a long moment, his mind working through the possibilities. Either Reggie was telling the truth, or he was lying through his teeth. Either way, the next step was clear. "All right," Aaron said finally. "We'll see what Marcus has to say when I bring him in." Reggie didn't respond, his expression unreadable as Aaron turned and left the shop. But as Aaron walked to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was closer than ever. Something was about to break, and when it did, the entire case would come crashing down. Chapter 9, Facing the past. Aaron couldn't get Marcus or Reggie out of his head. Every interaction, every subtle clue gnawed at his mind like a puzzle missing too many pieces. Something was off about both of them, and Tyler seemed like the victim caught in the middle of it. As he drove back to the precinct, he replayed everything: Reggie's nonchalant denial, Marcus's eagerness to shift blame. The truth was somewhere between the lines, but where? Once back at the station, Aaron reviewed Tyler's file again, not for new information, but to remind himself why this case was bothering him so much. He knew it wasn't just about Tyler. It was about something much bigger, something that had been gnawing at him for years but that he had always brushed off. His mind drifted back to his rookie days on the force, the excitement of putting on the uniform for the first time, the sense of purpose he had felt. He had wanted to make a difference, to be the kind of cop people could trust. But over the years, that youthful idealism had eroded. Experience had hardened him, turned him into someone who relied more on assumptions than on facts. There had been other Tylers in his past, young men arrested under circumstances that Aaron hadn't questioned, cases where he had trusted his instincts without a second thought. It was always easy to believe the system worked because it had worked for him. But now, for the first time, Aaron was seeing the cracks in that system. Was Tyler really just another suspect, or was he the product of a justice system that too often assumed guilt before innocence? Aaron stood up abruptly, shoving the file aside. He needed answers, and he needed them now. This wasn't just about clearing his conscience anymore. It was about fixing a wrong before it got worse. That he decided to pay Tyler another visit. He needed to hear Tyler's side of the story again, this time without the weight of his badge clouding the conversation. Tyler deserved to be listened to, not judged. Tyler sat in the holding cell, staring at the concrete floor beneath his feet. He had been in here for what felt like forever, and the anxiety was building with every passing second. His mother had told him they were working on getting him out, but how long would that take? And would it even matter? He thought about Marcus, his so-called best friend. How could Marcus have gotten him into this mess? It didn't make sense. Marcus wasn't a criminal, at least, not that Tyler knew of. But then again, how well did he really know Marcus? Could Marcus have been using him without him even realizing it? His thoughts were interrupted when the door opened, and Officer Marshall walked in. Tyler's body tensed immediately. He didn't want to talk to this man who had taken him off the streets like he was some common thief, who had looked at him like he was nothing. But something was different about the way Marshall was standing now. He didn't have the same commanding, accusatory presence. Instead, he looked conflicted. "Tyler," Marshall said softly, sitting down on the bench across from him. Tyler didn't respond at first. He wasn't sure if he should. What was there to say? "I need you to help me out," Marshall continued, his voice devoid of the usual authority. "I've been looking into Marcus and Reggie, and I think there's more to this than either of us knows. Tyler raised an eyebrow, skepticism flooding his thoughts. Now you care. After you threw me in here without even listening to me. Marshall didn't flinch. He deserved that. You're right, he admitted. I didn't listen. I didn't give you the benefit of the doubt, and I'm sorry. But I'm trying to make it right. I need to know what happened. Every detail. Tyler crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, Marshall said bluntly. But I'm the only one who's trying to figure this out. If I walk out of here, it'll just be another case that gets filed away, and you'll be stuck here while the real culprit walks free. Tyler hesitated. He didn't trust Marshall, not after what had happened. But what choice did he have? His mom was doing everything she could, but he knew how this worked. It was his word against the system's, and the system always won. He exhaled deeply. Marcus loaned me the car. He said it was fine. I didn't ask where he got it from because, well, I didn't think I needed to. Marcus is my friend. I trusted him. Marshall leaned forward, his eyes studying Tyler closely. Has Marcus ever done anything like this before? Borrowed cars from people, maybe gotten into some trouble? Tyler shook his head. Not that I know of. Marcus has always been, solid. He's had some rough patches, but he's not a bad guy. But you're not sure, Marshall pressed. Tyler's face tightened. I don't know, okay? I thought I did, but now I'm not sure what to think anymore. Marshall nodded, understanding. And Reggie? Do you know him? Tyler furrowed his brow. I've heard of him. He's one of Marcus's friends from the shop. I've never talked to him, though. Marshall sighed, rubbing his temples. It was clear that Marcus and Reggie were at the center of this, but Tyler didn't have the answers he needed. He would have to dig deeper. Look, Tyler, Marshall said, standing up. I'm going to keep looking into this. I'm going to talk to Reggie again. But I need you to keep trusting me, even if I don't deserve it. I'm not the same person who arrested you. I'm trying to do this right. Tyler watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him. He wasn't sure how to feel. Could he really trust Marshall? Or was this just another way for the system to manipulate him? But something in Marshall's voice, something about the way he had admitted his fault, gave Tyler a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Chapter 10, a deeper web. Aaron's heart pounded as he pulled up to Reggie Thompson's house later that evening. Something had changed in him after his conversation with Tyler. The wall that had once been built on pride and a false sense of justice was crumbling, and he was determined to get to the truth. The house was in a rough part of town, run down and barely holding together. Aaron knocked on the door, his knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. The seconds ticked by, and he could hear movement inside. The door swung open, revealing Reggie, who looked less than pleased to see Aaron again. What do you want? Reggie asked, his voice low and guarded. I need to talk to you, Reggie. I know you're involved in this, but I want to hear your side of the story. If you didn't steal the car, then tell me who did. Reggie hesitated, his eyes shifting nervously. I told you before, I don't know anything about a stolen car. Aaron stepped forward, his voice firm. Cut the crap, Reggie. Marcus already gave me your name. If you don't talk now, I'm taking you in. Reggie's face paled slightly, and for a moment, Aaron thought he might run. But then, something shifted in Reggie's expression, a flicker of fear, followed by resignation. All right, Reggie muttered, stepping aside to let Aaron in. But you're not going to like what you hear. The inside of the house was as rough as the exterior, cluttered with old furniture and a layer of grime that seemed to cover everything. Reggie motioned for Aaron to sit on a tattered couch, but Aaron remained standing. I didn't steal the car, Reggie began, rubbing the back of his neck. But I knew it was hot. I didn't ask questions because, well, you don't ask questions in my line of work. But I swear, I didn't know Marcus was going to loan it to someone else. Who stole the car, Reggie? Aaron pressed, his voice tense. Reggie glanced toward the window, as if checking to make sure no one was watching. It was one of my contacts. A guy who moves cars, you know. I'm not gonna give you his name, but trust me, he's the one who jacked it. He gave it to me to fix up. I was just supposed to do some repairs and move it on. But Marcus, he got greedy. He saw a nice ride and figured he could use it for a bit before I moved it. Aaron's jaw tightened. So Marcus knew the car was stolen? Reggie nodded slowly. Yeah, he knew. But he didn't think it would matter. Thought no one would notice. Aaron's chest tightened with a mix of anger and disappointment. Marcus had lied, not only to Aaron but to his own friend, Tyler, dragging him into a mess he had no part in. You need to tell me where I can find this contact of yours, Aaron demanded, his voice cold. Or you're going down with him. Reggie's eyes widened, but he shook his head. I can't, man. You don't get it. These guys, they don't mess around. If I give you his name, I'm dead. Aaron stepped closer, his voice deadly serious. If you don't, you're going to jail for accessory to grand theft auto. So either way, you're screwed. Might as well give me something that helps you out. Reggie looked like he was about to argue, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. All right. His name's Darnell. Darnell Carter. He's got a chop shop on the south side, but he doesn't stay in one place for long. If you're gonna catch him, you better move fast. Aaron nodded, his pulse quickening. He had a name now, a lead. This was it, the key to unraveling the entire case. But as he turned to leave, Reggie called out to him. Hey, man, Reggie said, his voice quieter now. Tyler didn't know. He really didn't. Marcus, he didn't tell him. Tyler's a good kid. Don't let him go down for this. Aaron didn't respond, but the weight of Reggie's words hung over him as he left the house. He had known, deep down, that Tyler wasn't guilty. But hearing it from Reggie confirmed what he had suspected all along. Now, he just had to prove it. Chapter 11, Closing in. Aaron wasted no time. The next morning, he assembled a small team to raid Darnell Carter's chop shop. He had no warrant yet, but that was the least of his concerns. He was going to catch this guy red-handed before he could slip away. The South Side was a different world from the suburban streets Aaron usually patrolled. It was rougher, darker, a place where the law often felt distant and the people who lived there were just trying to survive. But Darnell Carter was more than just a hustler trying to make a living. He was dangerous, and Aaron knew it. They pulled up to the chop shop just as the sun was rising, casting long shadows over the dilapidated building. Aaron's heart raced as he signaled for his team to move in. They spread out, surrounding the shop, weapons drawn, ready for anything. Aaron approached the front door, his gun at the ready. He could hear voices inside, laughter, the sound of metal clanging. It was business as usual for Darnell, but that was about to change. He kicked the door in, the sound of splintering wood followed by shouts of surprise. Darnell and a few of his guys scrambled, but it was too late. Aaron's team swarmed the place, pinning them to the ground before they had a chance to run. Darnell struggled as Aaron cuffed him, his eyes wild with anger. What the hell, man? You can't just bust in here like this. Aaron leaned in, his voice cold. You're under arrest for grand theft auto and operating an illegal chop shop. We've got you, Darnell. Darnell sneered, trying to pull free, but Aaron tightened the cuffs. You don't know who you're messing with, cop, Darnell spat, his eyes flashing with defiance. Aaron didn't flinch. I know exactly who I'm messing with. And I've got all the time in the world to bring you down. As the rest of the team secured the scene, Aaron felt a sense of relief wash over him. It was finally over. He had the man responsible, and now, Tyler could be set free. But even as the victory settled in, Aaron knew that this case had changed him. He had learned a lot about himself, about the assumptions he had made and the walls he had built around his own sense of justice. And he knew that it wasn't just this one case. The system was broken in ways he hadn't fully understood before, and Tyler was just one of many who had been caught in its cracks. Chapter 12, A New Beginning. The next day, Aaron sat in the precinct, watching as Tyler Johnson walked out of the holding cell. His mother was there to meet him, her face etched with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. But Tyler was free, and that was all that mattered now. Tyler caught sight of Aaron as he approached the door. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that moment, Aaron saw the pain and the anger that still lingered in Tyler's gaze. But there was also something else, something that resembled gratitude. Tyler walked over to Aaron, his steps slow and deliberate. So, I'm free now? he asked, his voice steady but cautious. Aaron nodded. You're free. Darnell's been arrested, and Reggie admitted to what happened. You had nothing to do with it. Tyler stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Thanks. I guess. Aaron didn't expect more than that. He didn't deserve more than that. I'm sorry, Tyler, he said quietly. For not listening. For assuming the worst. I was wrong. Tyler's jaw tightened, but then he nodded slowly. You were, he said simply. But I guess you made it right in the end. They stood in silence for a moment before Tyler turned to leave with his mother. As Aaron watched them walk out of the precinct, he felt a strange sense of closure. He had righted a wrong, but more importantly, he had started to see the world through a different lens. As the days passed, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long journey. His views on justice, fairness, and what it meant to serve the community had been irreversibly altered. He knew that he had work to do, not just as a cop, but as a person. He needed to learn, to listen, and to do better. He had taken the first step. And that, perhaps, was the most important part of the journey. Epilogue. The long road ahead. Months later, Aaron found himself sitting in a community meeting, something he never thought he'd do. It was a gathering of local activists, city officials, and people from all walks of life, discussing ways to address systemic racial bias in policing. Aaron was there to listen, to understand, and to be part of the change. As he sat quietly in the back of the room, he saw Tyler Johnson walk in with his mother. They didn't see him, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were there, standing tall, part of a community fighting for justice and equality. Aaron smiled to himself, knowing that he still had a long way to go. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The end.